This is an audio-visual recording of an abridged version of To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, Chapter 15. It was decided, after much pleading, that Dill would stay. We had a week apiece together. I minded Auntie, Jim had outgrown the tree house, and Dill had a plan of putting lemon drops leading from Boo's house out in order to make Boo come out of his house. There was a knock on the front door, and it was Heck Tate. Here was some men outside as well and wanted Atticus to come outside. There were only two reasons why men and Maycomb stayed outside, and that was because there was a death or to talk politics. Atticus went outside and we pressed our faces to the window to see and hear what was going on. We heard, "Moving him to the county jail tomorrow." Mr. Tate was saying, "I don't look for any trouble, but I can't guarantee there won't be any." "Don't be foolish, Heck," Atticus said. "This is Maycomb." Said I was just uneasy. There was more talk. Mr. Link Dees wanted to know if there was a chance that the trial could be held in another town for safety reasons. Mr. Dees is nervous about a crowd coming together when they're drunk and causing trouble for Tom. He continued, "Don't know why you touched it in the first place. You got everything to lose from this, Atticus. I mean everything." "Do you really think so?" "Link, that boy might go to the chair, but he's not going till the truth's told." Atticus's voice was even. "And you know what the truth is." There was a murmur from a group of men. In the crowd there were merchants, in-town farmers, Dr. Reynolds, and Mr. Avery. Jim yelled out nervously, "Atticus, the telephone's ringing," even though it wasn't. Atticus told him to answer the phone, and it made everyone in the group laugh. When Atticus came in, he went to his chair and picked up the paper to read. I walked home with Dill and returned in time to overhear a conversation between Atticus and Auntie. I found Jim in his bedroom. "Have they been at it?" I asked him. "Sort of. She won't let him alone about Tom Robinson. She always said Atticus was disgracing the family. Scout, I'm scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared about Atticus. Somebody might hurt him." The next day was Sunday, and Tom Robinson had just been moved to the Maycomb jail. The Sunday was quiet. Atticus went to his office, Aunt Alexandra went for a 2-hour nap, and Jim, in his old age, went to his room with a stack of football magazines. So Dill and I went out to pasture to kick around the football. After supper, Atticus did something that interested us. He came into the living room, carrying a long extension cord. There was a light bulb at the end. "I'm going out for a while," he said. "You folks will be in bed when I come back, so I'll say good night now." He put on his hat and went out the back door. We noticed that he took the car. One of our father's peculiarities was that he liked to walk, so taking the car was peculiar. Later on, I said good night to Auntie, and while I was in my room, I heard Jim rattling around in his room. I went in and asked him what he was doing. "I'm going downtown for a while." He was changing his pants. "Why, it's almost 10 o'clock, Jim. I'm going with you. If you say no, you're not, I'm going anyway, here." I dressed quickly, and Jim gave in with little grace. I said that Dill would probably want to come, so we stopped at Dill's window at Miss Rachel's. "What are you up to?" Dill asked. "Jim's got the look-arounds." "I just got this feeling," Jim said. "Just this feeling." We looked at Atticus's office, but it was dark inside. We decided to go up the street, thinking he was visiting with Mr. Underwood, editor and writer of the Maycomb Tribune. He not only ran the newspaper, he lived about the office. On the way to the newspaper office, we had to go past the jail. There, sitting in front of the jail, was Atticus with the light and extension cord. I was going to run to him, but Jim stopped me. He said that Atticus would not like us being there. We were turning to leave and saw 4 cars moving slowly in line stop in front of the jail. Atticus seemed to have been expecting them. In ones and twos, men got out of the cars. Atticus remained where he was. The men hid from view. "He in there, Mr. Finch?" a man said. "He is," we heard Atticus answer, "and he's asleep. Don't wake him up." The men talked in near whispers. "You know what we want," another man said. "Get aside from the porch, Mr. Finch." "You can turn around and go home again, Walter," Atticus said pleasantly. "Heck Tate's around somewhere." The hell he is, said another man. Heck's bunch so deep in the woods they won't get out till morning. Indeed. Why do? Called him off on a snipe hunt, was the succinct answer. Didn't you think of that, Mr. Finch? Thought about it, but didn't believe it. Well then, my father's voice was still the same. That changes things, doesn't it? It do, another deep voice said. Its owner was a shadow. Do you really think so? With that, I couldn't take it any more. I broke away from Jim and ran to Atticus as fast as I could. I pushed my way through the dark, smelly bodies and burst into the circle of light. Hey, Atticus! A flash of plain fear was in my eyes, and Jim and Dill wriggled into the light too. There was a smell of stale whiskey and pigpen. I looked around and did not recognize these men. These men were not the same men as the other night. Atticus got up from his chair. Go home, Jim, he said. Take Scout and Dill home. The way Jim was standing, he was not thinking of budging. Go home, I said. Jim shook his head. Son, I said go home. Jim shook his head again. I'll send him home, a burly man said, and grabbed Jim roughly by the collar. He yanked Jim nearly off his feet. Don't you touch him! I kicked the man swiftly. I was surprised to see him fall back in real pain. I intended to kick his shin, but aimed too high. Atticus told me that will do, and said that I shouldn't kick folks. All right, Mr. Finch, get him out of here, someone growled. You got 15 seconds to get him out of here. In the midst of this strange assembly, Atticus stood trying to make Jim mind him. I ain't going, was his steady answer to Atticus's threats, requests, and finally, please, Jim, take them home. I was getting a bit tired of that, but felt Jim had his own reasons for doing as he did, in view of his prospects once Atticus did get home. I looked around the crowd. It was a summer's night, but the men were dressed, most of them, in overalls and denim shirts buttoned up to the collars. I thought they must be cold natures, as their sleeves were unrolled and buttoned at the cuffs. Some wore hats pulled firmly down over their ears. They were sullen-looking, sleepy-eyed men who seemed unused to late hours. I sought once more for a familiar face, and at the center of the semicircle I found one. Hey, Mr. Cunningham! The man did not hear me, it seemed. Hey, Mr. Cunningham, how's your entailment getting along? Mr. Walter Cunningham's legal affairs were well known to me. Atticus had once described them at length. The big man blinked and hooked his thumbs in his overall straps. He seemed uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and looked away. My friendly overture had fallen flat. Mr. Cunningham wore no hat, and the top half of his forehead was white, in contrast to his sun-scorched face, which led me to believe that he wore one most days. He shifted his feet, clad in heavy work shoes. Don't you remember me, Mr. Cunningham? I'm Jean Louise Finch. You brought us some hickory nuts one time, remember? I began to sense the futility one feels when unacknowledged by a chance acquaintance. I go to school with Walter, I began again. He's your boy, ain't he? Ain't he, sir? Mr. Cunningham was moved to a faint nod. He did know me after all. He's in my grade, I said, and he does right well. He's a good boy, I added. A real nice boy. We brought him home for dinner one time. Maybe he told you about me. I beat him up once, but he was real nice about it. Tell him hey for me, won't you? Atticus had said it was the polite thing to talk to people about what they were interested in, not about what you were interested in. Mr. Cunningham displayed no interest in his son, so I tackled his entailment once more in a last-ditch effort to make him feel at home. Entailments are bad, I was advising him, when I slowly awoke to the fact that I was addressing the entire aggregation. The men were all looking at me. Some had their mouths half open. Atticus had stopped poking at Jim. They were standing together beside Dill. Their attention amounted to fascination. Atticus's mouth, even, was half open, an attitude he once described as uncouth. Our eyes met, and he shut it. Well, Atticus, I was just saying to Mr. Cunningham that entailments are bad and all that, but you said not to worry. It takes a long time sometimes, that you'd all write it out together. I was slowly drying up, wondering what idiocy I had committed. Entailment seemed all right enough for living room talk. I began to feel sweat gathering at the edges of my hair. I could stand anything but a bunch of people looking at me. They were quite still. "What's the matter?" I asked. Atticus said nothing. I looked around and up at Mr. Cunningham, whose face was equally impassive. Then he did a peculiar thing. He squatted down and took me by both shoulders. "I'll tell 'em you said hey, little lady," he said. Then he straightened up and waved a big paw. "Let's clear out," he called. "Let's get going, boys." As they had come, in ones and twos, the men shuffled back to their ramshackle cars. Doors slammed, engines coughed, and they were gone. I turned to Atticus. "Can we go home now?" He nodded. "Mr. Finch, they gone?" "They've gone," he said. "Get some sleep, Tom. They won't bother you any more." From a different direction, another voice cut crisply through the night. "You're damned tootin' they won't. Had you covered all the time, Atticus." Mr. Underwood and a double-barreled shotgun were leaning out the window. We started to walk home. Atticus and Jim were ahead of me and Dill. I thought Atticus would give Jim hell for not going home, but I was wrong. Atticus reached out and massaged Jim's hair, his one gesture of affection.